Week 5 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking this week. Number 1, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. What a year it's been for Collins. 489 receiving yards on the season. Last week went out, had a monster performance. 12 catches, 151 yards, and a touchdown in the victory versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. And this week, a good matchup versus the Buffalo Bills, where Von Miller is suspended now. Secondary isn't all that great. We saw the Ravens go up and down the field last week versus Buffalo Bill team. And I think Nico Collins, he's one of the best receivers in the league right now and uncoverable. And this week, like I said, Nico Collins, once again, it wouldn't be surprising to me if he goes over 100 yards, which he's done in 3 out of 4 times in the early going. Number 2, Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. This week, a big matchup for Chase and the Bengals. Baltimore Ravens coming to town. Chase, he always has the juices flowing, especially versus division rivals like the Ravens and games versus the Chiefs in his NFL career. So this season, he got off to a slow start, holding out in training camp. But the last 2 weeks, he's found the end zone and made some big plays. So once again, Chase, he's back to being an elite wide receiver after the slow start. And once again, I think he goes out there with a nice performance. Number 3, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. I know it's a tough matchup. Sauce Gardner most likely going to be on Jefferson, but he's a matchup-proof wide receiver, and a lot of people's concerns coming into the year that Sam Darnold or McCarthy, whoever the quarterback was going to be, aren't going to get the production or get the football to Jefferson. But obviously, that hasn't been the case, and him and Darnold on the same page. Jefferson's going out there, still putting up the elite numbers, and even this week in a tougher matchup versus the Jets, he's a top option. Number 4, Malik Nabers of the New York Giants. What a rookie year it's been in the first month of the season of his career. Second in the league in receiving. He's the main playmaker on this Giant offense, getting peppered with targets each and every week. And he's uncoverable. We've seen him now the last few weeks go out there, make acrobatic grabs, yard after catch ability, ways to get open. And this week at Seattle, we're most likely Tariq Woolen on him, one of the better corners in the league. I still think Nabers goes out there and impresses once again. Number 5, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. Lamb last week found the end zone on a long touchdown, but the numbers still haven't been elite numbers for CeeDee Lamb. Couple good ball games, but not that monster 30, 35-point fantasy game. And this week, a tough matchup at the Steelers, where their defense is solid. I know last week they gave up 113 yards to Michael Pittman, but I think that was a little bit of a fluky ball game in Indianapolis, where we've seen a lot of high-scoring games over there in the last few seasons. So this week, CeeDee Lamb's still a top 5 option, but if he had an off game, it wouldn't be surprising as well. Number 6, DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. Metcalf, first 3 out of 4 games, 100-yard games for DK Metcalf. We know he's a physical wide receiver, and this season, in this new offense, he's thriving big time, and him and Geno Smith back on the same page. So this week, what a great matchup. And Metcalf's been uncoverable as well the first month of the season. I think he has another great game. Number 7, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Evans going to Atlanta, a team he's had great success against in his NFL career. An indoor game, obviously. Fast track, Thursday Night Football, usually high scoring. And Mike Evans last week got back on track, finding the end zone and having a big game. So this week, I think Mike Evans and Baker do it once again. Number 8, Stephon Diggs of the Houston Texans. This is a big revenge game for Stephon Diggs in this one. Obviously, Buffalo trading him away in the offseason to this Texan team. And Diggs, he's fit like a glove in this offense with C.J. Stroud and Nico Collins. So they're getting the football down the field. They're making plays. Is this Houston Texan team? And even last week, Stephon Diggs, he got a play where it was for him to throw it. Didn't find anyone open, so he ran himself within the 10-yard line and found the end zone. So this week, it wouldn't be surprising to me if he goes over 100 yards and a touchdown versus former team. Number 9, Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Chris Godwin, what a season it's been for him. And the main change, he's back in the slot. He's making plays as Chris Godwin. Him and Baker on the same page. And he's always got the matchup advantage with slower corners on him coming out of the slot, or even safeties at times. So Chris Godwin, good matchup at Atlanta. Fast track. Their defense leaky in the secondary a little bit. And I like Godwin once again to have a great performance. Number 10, Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. First week of the season, he got out of the gate slow as Marvin Harrison, but the last few weeks, he's had some big ball games. Last week found the end zone. I know this week a tougher matchup at the 9. He's one of the better defenses in the league, but Marvin, he's a true number 1, I believe, even coming out of college. He can run all the routes. He's got the athleticism. He's got the speed. And this week at San Francisco, game most likely they're trailing early and often. I think the volume will be there. Number 11, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. It was slow the first 2 weeks of the season, but Olave the last 2 weeks have broke out and put up numbers of the first 2 weeks. The Saint offense put up 91 points, and Olave wasn't much of a factor in those ball games. And then the last 2 weeks where they've struggled to score consistently, he's gone out there and had his best games of the year. So this week in a matchup where they know they got to put points on the board, we know Mahomes, he's without his top receiver in Rashee Rice in this game. Pacheco's been out the last couple weeks as well. We don't know if he returns this season. But still, this team's going to have to put points on the board, and I think Olave in a tough matchup still goes out there and produces 12. Deontay Johnson of the Carolina Panthers. Deontay Johnson, first 2 weeks of the season, nothing, but ever since Dalton inserted into the lineup week 3 of Vegas, 120 yards in that one for him and a touchdown. And then last week, over 70 yards and found the end zone. So Deontay Johnson, we route runners in the league. We know he has good hands. And this week, it's definitely a tough matchup versus a good, bad defense at Soldier Field. But I like Deontay as a top 12 option. He's going out there producing, and him and Dalton really have the rapport going. 13, Jayden Reed of the Green Bay Packers. Jayden Reed, he's been a great receiver so far in his early career. Last season, 10 touchdowns in his rookie season. And this year, the 2 games with Jordan Love at quarterback, he's had over 25 fantasy points in both games. So this week in a good matchup with the Rams, where their defense isn't all that good, I think Jayden Reed once again goes out there, has another good performance. 14, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. It's been a mixed bag of results in the early going with London. But like I said, Kirk Cousins still not 100% coming off the Achilles. Still has to learn this offense for the Atlanta Falcons. And Drake London, we know he's a big-time wide receiver, big prospect coming out of college. And this week, I think London goes out there versus a banged-up secondary on Thursday night in a potential high-scoring game. Has a good one. 15, Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. Deebo surprisingly returned last week to the lineup. This week, a good matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals. And I think Deebo could go out there and be productive. Brandon Ayuk really hasn't done much this season. George Kittle's definitely been solid, no doubt about it, for the San Francisco 49er team. But Deebo, he could do it all. Use him as a gadget guy. Use him in the seam. Use him in the slot. And this Arizona Cardinal defense, they just can't stop anyone. And we saw last week giving up 42 points to the Commanders. 16, Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. And it's been tough sledding, no doubt about it, the first month of the season for Wilson. A lot of people thought he was going to have the monster season and be a top 5 wideout. But obviously that hasn't been the case so far this season. And this week, a tough matchup with the Minnesota Vikings in London, where their defense creates turnovers, creating havoc. And Wilson last week got shut down for the most part versus one of the best corners, if not the best corner in the league, Patrick Surtain. So this week, another tough matchup on paper. Aaron Rodgers and him aren't on the same page, really. So he's down in the rankings. 17, George Pickens. Pittsburgh Steelers, George Pickens and Fields, they're starting to get things going for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. This week, a decent matchup versus the Cowboys. I know Trevon Diggs most likely going to be guarding Pickens, but he's the number 1 target on this offense, and he's been getting peppered with targets all season long. The only threat for a lot of targets in that offense is Freiermuth, but obviously Pickens, his athleticism, his breakaway speed, and playmaking ability is getting him open. He's making plays, and last week a big ball game for Pickens it was in Indianapolis. And this week I think he has another good performance. 18, Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. So Tyreek Hill, he was a top 1-2 wide receiver coming into the year. But now with Tyler Huntley at quarterback and the carousel, whoever else might start at quarterback, his numbers had dropped off big time over the last 2 weeks here. Is Tyreek Hill, and a lot of frustration last week on the sidelines. But this week at New England, a team he's familiar with, I think he could go out there, have a salvageable game. But besides Hill and Achane, no one else on this roster has value. It only takes one deep ball for Tyreek Hill to have a game. So Huntley last week just missed on a 70-yard touchdown with Hill overthrowing him. So I think this week there's definitely a possibility they could connect, but I will lower my expectations as well for Tyreek Hill this week. 19, Brian Thomas Jr. 19, Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Brian Thomas, it's been a solid rookie campaign for him so far. And a lot of nice rookie wide receivers early in the year. Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze had the one nice game earlier this season. And now you got, obviously, Brian Thomas breaking out over the last few weeks. So Brian Thomas, big target, took him in the first round of the NFL draft. Him and Trevor Lawrence already have a good rapport, and most likely in a ball game where it's going to be back and forth between these two teams. I think Thomas can find the end zone once again. Number 20, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. Terry McLaurin, first 2 weeks didn't do much, but the last 2 weeks he's found the end zone in both games. And we know he's a big-time wide receiver, is Terry McLaurin. This is possibly the best quarterback he's played with in his NFL career with Jaden Daniels. This kid's got a lot of poise. He knows how to play the game, and we know he's a superstar in the making, winning the Heisman Trophy as well last season. So this week, I know it's a tough matchup on paper with Denzel Ward most likely shadowing him in this ball game, but I still believe he could go out there, have a good game. 21 DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears last season. What a year it was for him in his first season with Chicago, but that was with Justin Fields at quarterback. And so far, Caleb Williams, very inconsistent, holding on to the football a whole lot. Yes, he's taking big hits, no doubt about it, is Caleb Williams, and this offensive line isn't all that great. DJ Moore in a revenge game versus the team that traded him could go out there and have a nice performance. 22, Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns. Talk about just missing last week, just missed a 70-plus yard touchdown that called back for an offensive hold in that ball game. So Amari Cooper, we know he's a good route runner. Also, we know he's on the trade block, and then let's say he gets traded to the Kansas City Chiefs or even the Dallas Cowboys, where he was a few seasons ago. I think Cooper's value will go up, but him and Watson, like I said, they don't have a rapport going right now in this offense. Deshaun Watson definitely taking a step back over the last few seasons, but I think Amari Cooper this week versus a beatable secondary has a decent game. Number 23, Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. At JSN, it's been up and down so far in the early going, but he's definitely working his way into number 2 wide receiver production and seeing the field more for the Seahawks team. So this week with a good matchup versus a weak Giants secondary, I think Jackson Smith could go out there, have a good game as long as the targets are there. And we've seen this season where he's been targeting double digits. He's had good performances. 24, Brandon Ayuk of the San Francisco 49ers. It's been a struggle for Ayuk, and that's what happens when you don't have training camp. Your legs aren't on you're not up to game speed, and we've seen that all season so far with Ayuk. Last week non-existent, and this week if he can't do much versus the Arizona Cardinals, then it's definitely time to panic. But Brandon Ayuk's also a player I mentioned a couple weeks ago that I would try to sell off, because with all these weapons in this offense, and like I said, he's not 100% up to snuff, conditioning, and the playbook once again this season. Ayuk, it might just be a down year. Number 25, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. Flowers last week, he didn't do much, and he didn't have to, rightfully so, with Henry going for 209 yards from scrimmage. So this week, division matchup, we know things are going to be tight in this one most likely. They're going to have to throw the football more. And Zay Flowers, we know he's a big play wide receiver. We saw last year's rookie year. We've seen some plays this season. And this week at Cincinnati, I think he could go out there, have a bounce-back performance. 26, staying in the same game, T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. T. Higgins, the last couple weeks, I mentioned in other videos, just missing on a touchdown in Week 3 versus the Commanders. And then last week, he made a few plays, but only 12 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But this week in a matchup versus Baltimore, where their secondary has given up points to wide receivers at times this season, I think Higgins is a back-end 2 option. Flex could be decent. 27, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. So Michael Pittman finally had over 100 yards last week, and this week a good matchup of paper at the Jacksonville Jaguars. But the thing with Pittman, obviously him and Anthony Richardson haven't been on the same page, because last season Pittman, he did well with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, having over 1,100 yards last season. So this week, I'm still going to limit expectations, even though it's a good matchup at the Jaguars. And we'll see the quarterback situation as the week goes on, who's going to start as well. 28, Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Last couple weeks, Kirk's come back and put up some big ball games. After the first 2 weeks, he was non-existent, but still, in my opinion, the number 1 man in the receiving room is Brian Thomas Jr. We saw it the first few weeks already this season, and Christian Kirk's a good route runner, underneath guy, found the end zone last week, and this week in a pretty decent matchup versus the Colts, I think he could be a flex option. 29, Rashid Shaheed of the New Orleans Saints. So maybe I'm low on Shaheed this week than other people, but Shaheed last week, no doubt about it, he proved he's not a one-trick pony. Catching 8 passes, a career high in that game at the Falcons, and it wasn't really any deep balls as well, but for the most part, reputation where he's a deep ball threat or nothing for fantasy owners, and we saw that boom or bust play in Week 3 versus Philadelphia, where he had the goose egg. So this week versus a tough defense, and they know the assignment going into Arrowhead on Monday night. He's number 29, 30, Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. So we'll see the injury report as it comes on this week. Shakir was banged up with the ankle, getting it taped up in last week's ball game and a blowout loss at Baltimore. But Shakir is still the number 1 wideout on this offense. A decent matchup of Houston, where their secondary hasn't been all that great. And if Shakir goes in this one, he's a solid flex option. 31, Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Xavier Worthy, week 1, we thought he was off to the races, 2 touchdowns in that game. And ever since then, it's been quiet besides last week, that one deep ball he hit on with Mahomes for 54 yards. Now with Rice out, Worthy's going to have to step up and play a key role in this offense. I know they got other guys, Juju Smith-Schuster, Watson, Sky Moore, but Worthy has more upside, more speed, and if you can get him the ball in space, he can make plays. So this week in a matchup versus New Orleans, I think he could be good for a deep ball in this one. 32, Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. Last week he got peppered with targets. 3 catches, 60 yards, found the end zone in a wet ball game in MetLife Stadium at the New York Jets. And him and Bo Nix are starting to get the rapport down. They're starting to make plays. And Cortland Sutton's been a solid receiver the last few seasons. So this week with a decent matchup versus the Raiders, I think he's a perfect flex option. 33, Dontayvion Wicks of the Green Bay Packers. Wicks, it was a slow start for him, and he was the 4th receiver pretty much going into the year. But now Christian Watson hurt with the high ankle sprain. He's going to miss a week supposedly. We'll see. That's usually a 2 to 4 week injury for the most part, that high ankle sprain. But Wicks, like I said, last week broke out 78 yards, 2 touchdowns in that one. We saw flashes at the end of last season. Him and Jordan Love had rapport. And like I said, Jordan Love likes spreading the football out. And this week in a good matchup at the Rams, I think Wicks could be a decent flex option. 34, Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants. He's been a PPR machine in the early going, is Robinson. And he fits this offense well, being an underneath route runner in this offense where Daniel Jones don't like throwing the football deep. And with all the attention going to Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale could work out of the slot, work underneath, and make his plays. And last week, 11 catches, 71 yards versus the Cowboys. So this week, not a great matchup at Seattle, but I still think he has flex appeal. 35, Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. So yes, he might be down on my list after he came off 3 catches, 72 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But that's obviously a fluky performance, I believe, for Jordan Addison last week. I know he's a decent receiver. We saw flashes from him in his rookie season. But this week with the tough matchup, and like I said, 3 catches and 2 of them were touchdowns, I'm going to limit expectations. He's a flex option at best, and the final receiver I'm ranking is Xavier Legette of the Carolina Panthers. So Legette last week had a breakout game. With Thielen out now on IR, minimum 3 more games. Legette stepped up, played well. Number 2 wide receiver most likely in this offense. His only competition's Jonathan Mingo, and we haven't seen much out of him last season and this season for the young wideout. So Legette's a tall wide receiver. They took him in the NFL draft this season, Carolina Panther team. And Andy Dalton's a veteran and knows how to get the football to his playmakers. So this week, I know it's a tougher matchup in Chicago, but Legette, I think, could have a decent ball game. So that's top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking for week 5 of the fantasy football season.